Today is August 4th, 2025. This is Read Through the Bible.
Special recap
edition on the book of Luke.
Yep. And we just want to make sure that if you're listening in the afternoon, you may have missed then our episode from this morning, which is Luke 24. But we're going to summarize all the Gospel of Luke in this podcast.
Right. So this is coming to you on Monday afternoon.
Yep.
Tomorrow morning, on Tuesday morning, we will start the book of Joshua.
Back in the Old Testament. Yep.
Right. So
Joshua's a great book.
Yes,
Looking forward to that.
Very
okay.
exciting.
I got a trivia question for you. Which author wrote more than any other author in the New Testament?
You'd think it was Paul,
Yep.
but it wasn't.
No.
It was Luke.
Luke wrote 2 books of the Bible. He wrote Luke and the book of Acts, and it's kind of like part 1 and part 2, the life of Jesus, what he began, and then Acts chapter 2. Acts is really basically the second part of what Jesus did.
The story of the early church.
Yep.
But Luke is very detailed and writes long chapters, and so that's why it's more of the New Testament than anybody else.
Yep. And he's a fine historian.
Right.
Because by occupation he is a
physician.
How do you know he's a physician?
Paul talks about him in Colossians 4 verse 14.
Calling him what?
Calls him the beloved physician.
Okay.
So Luke probably traveled with Paul on a lot of his journeys.
He did.
As a physician.
Mm-hmm.
So he knew a lot of the stories.
Yep.
So.
Okay, and so what we want to do with these recap editions is basically take Luke and take our summaries and kind of back up and do a summary of the summaries.
Yeah.
So as we summarize the Gospel of Luke, what we're going to do is just give you the overall kind of outline of the Gospel of Luke, and then for each chapter, point out maybe significant stories. We can't catch everything, but focusing mostly on the stories that are unique to Luke, that are different. Because Luke has quite a few stories and episodes of Jesus that are different than Matthew and Mark, for sure. But there are sometimes when the chapters are almost exactly the same. But when they're different events, we're focusing mostly on those that are unique to Luke.
Right. We also want to talk about the structure of Luke.
Yep.
And it seems like Luke organized his gospel according to the geographical locations where Jesus was in his ministry.
Yep. I think the key verse in terms of that, the structure, comes in chapter 9, verse 51. It says, when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. So at that point is when he basically starts walking towards Jerusalem. So if we work back from that, basically it's chapter 5 through 9 have to do with his Galilean ministry up in the north. So even before that, it has to do with his coming on the scene.
Right, like his arrival.
Birth,
chapters 1 through 4.
Birth into Nazareth. And then he goes to Galilee in 5 through 9. And then from 9 through 18, or actually 10 through 18, he is heading to Jerusalem. And then in chapter 19, he arrives in Jerusalem, and that's where it ends. So starting in Nazareth in the wilderness in preparation, and then in Galilee, 5 through 9, and then heading to Jerusalem, 10 through 18, and then 19 and following is in Jerusalem. So that's kind of like a nice geographic overview, highlighting the importance of chapter 9, verse 51.
Right, and if you're not sure about the geography of this area at the time of Jesus, there's probably a map in the back of your Bible.
Yep, the last book in the back of your Bible is the book of maps.
Right.
So you can look at that. Okay, so we're just going to zip through the Gospel of Luke, reminding you of the structure each time. So here is basically Jesus' arrival on the scene. Luke chapter 1. Of all the events there, I think the most significant one is that John is born.
Yes, okay.
The birth of John and Jesus is announced. John is born.
Right.
Okay. And then chapter 2.
Chapter 2, we have Jesus is born.
Yep.
So.
And that's chapter 2 is the Jesus story. It's often told at Christmas time. Really famous story about that. Mm-hmm. And then in chapter 3.
We have John's ministry. That would be John the Baptist. Mm-hmm. But we could say John's ministry and then the genealogy of Jesus.
And what's often helpful is if you can, like, in backing up from the book of Luke, like these are so simple. If you would spend a little bit of time with these events, tying them to chapter numbers, you'd be amazed at how well this helps you in understanding the Bible. So, like in Luke chapter 3 is John's ministry, And Matthew chapter 3 also has John's ministry. So if you kind of think about John 3 or Luke 3 and Matthew 3, that's the ministry of Jesus, or ministry of John the Baptist rather. And same thing happens in chapter 4, because in chapter 4 we have
Jesus' temptation,
which also occurs in Matthew chapter 4.
Yep.
So if you kind of tie those things together, it's really going to help you. So the first 4 chapters, we see Jesus arriving on the scene in Nazareth and in the wilderness, being tempted, whatever. And then we see him coming into Galilee,
right?
chapters 5 through 9. So these are just things he's doing in Galilee.
Okay, so chapter 5, we are saying, our summary is, large catch, Peter, James, and John, and Levi called.
Yep. And the large catch is because that's like the unique thing in this gospel that is unique to the Gospel of Luke. Mm-hmm. And that's when Jesus told Peter to throw the net over the sea, and he got so many, and he fell before Jesus, and but the miraculous catch, and then he says, you'll be fishers of men.
Right.
And then chapter 6.
Okay, we have calls the 12, and then Sermon on the Plain.
Yep. So this is the Sermon on the Mount, but kind of, it's not on a mountain. It says it's on a flat place, but he says the same things in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, so almost the same sermon, but just some different details.
And a lot shorter.
Yeah.
And some of the other details of the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, they show up later.
In the Gospel of Luke. But that's typical. Jesus was an evangelist. He had a message that he preached all around in different places. Okay. And then we got chapter 7.
Okay, we have widow's son raised, and sinful woman's hair. That's what I wrote. You have a little bit more.
As a sinful woman wipes Jesus' feet.
Okay.
And so those are 2 stories in the Gospel of Luke which are unique, of the widow's son being raised from the dead. Mm-hmm. And then this is similar to what happened with him right before his burial, but different.
But yeah, different story.
Yeah, and this is a great place where it speaks about he was in the house of a leper, and Jesus spoke about her great love for Jesus. The Pharisee, and the Pharisee didn't bow down or kiss the feet of Jesus, but she didn't stop doing that. Okay, and then chapter 8.
Okay, we have supporting women.
That's unique, to the Gospel of Luke. These are women
who traveled with Jesus and the disciples, but they financially supported him.
Yeah, these are significant women who supported Jesus in his ministry. Yep.
Yeah, so supporting women, sower parable.
Yep.
And then legion.
Yep, the legion of demons. And so this is the story about going into the swine and the pigs and things like that. Now, the sower and the seed and the demons, that's in Mark and Luke as well. But it's helpful if you know Luke 8 is the parable of the sower.
Right.
Matthew 13 is the parable of the sower. Mark 4 is the parable of the sower. It's like a big point where he's talking about the kingdom. I just feel it's significant to remember in Luke chapter 8. Mm-hmm. Okay, chapter 9.
Okay, chapter 9, we have Peter's confession and the transfiguration. And then verse 51.
Yep, and I think the key here is every gospel, as soon as Peter confesses that Jesus is the Christ, that's a big turning point in the gospel accounts.
And in the focus of Jesus' ministry. It really shifts there.
And then after that, the transfiguration shows up in Matthew chapter 17 and in Mark chapter 9. So that's just the significance of that. And then chapter 9, verse 51, again, setting his face towards Jerusalem. So here's where his Galilean ministry in the Gospel of Luke ends, chapters 5 through 9, and then heading towards Jerusalem in 10 through 18.
Okay, so chapter 10, we have Good Samaritan and Mary and Martha.
Yep, that's where Mary was all busybody. Hey, why don't you tell Martha to help me? Or Martha was busybody. Tell Mary to help me. And Jesus said, no, she's listening. She's chosen the good part. That's really good. So the Good Samaritan, chapter 10, like if you remember that even, where's the story of the Good Samaritan? Luke chapter 10. And the story about Martha and Mary, Luke chapter 10. Unique. Okay,
chapter 11, we have the Lord's Prayer and woes to Pharisees and lawyers.
Yep, it is the Lord's Prayer, but I think that there is more about prayer in chapter 11. So just prayer in general, it's not only the Lord's Prayer, but also talks about if you have a good father, he's not going to give you a stone, right? He's going to give you good things. So
and then the woes are unique to Luke.
Yep, in this situation, okay, chapter 12.
We have rich fool and be ready.
Yep. The rich fool is the one who says, hey, the one who built his bigger barns and didn't realize that his soul was required of him that very night. And then, even, we didn't mention this, but don't be anxious. Sermon on the Mount kind of comes up here as well.
Yeah.
Talking about financial things, and then be ready, just talking about be ready for his return. Okay, chapter 13.
Okay, the Siloam Tower and narrow door.
Yeah. And that's the story about tragedies. And when the tragedies come, he just says, repent, right?
Again, unique to Luke.
Yep. Chapter 14.
Okay, 14, we have dine at the Pharisees, and then the banquet parable.
Yep. So Jesus was invited to the house of a Pharisee, and so he told these very difficult things. And so that's where he told the wedding parable. And these people were turning away from that. But it's all, and he tells some really rich things about discipleship when he'd been invited to this banquet at the Pharisee's house.
Okay, 15 is lost sheep, coin, and son.
Okay, that's good. Okay, chapter 16.
Shrewd manager, rich man, and Lazarus.
Okay, so that's the story of the guy who was losing his job, and he cut everybody's bill in half so he could...
He was shrewd.
Yeah, he's very shrewd. And then the rich man and Lazarus, someone won't believe even if they raise from the dead, right? Okay, chapter 17.
Okay, 17 is 10 lepers and the coming kingdom.
Yep, the lepers are the 10 that were healed. Only one came back and gave thanks.
Okay, 18.
And that, by the way, 10 lepers, that's unique to Luke. So, again, remember that.
Okay, 18. We have the judge and widow, and then the Pharisee and tax collector.
Yep, and those are the two things unique to Luke there, about the widow pestering the unrighteous judge, and then we should come as a tax collector, sinners beating our breast and just pleading God's mercy, rather than being proud of our righteousness. Okay, and then chapter 19, we find ourselves in Jerusalem, coming in the middle of the chapter.
Yep, so then this is the new section. And so we have Zacchaeus and triumphal entry.
Yep, Zacchaeus is unique to the Gospel of Luke. And it's helpful for you to know where the triumphal entry is, right? In Matthew, it's in chapter 21. In Mark, it's in chapter 11. And here in Luke, it's in 19. And in John, it's in chapter 12. Like, that really divides as a major portion of division in all your Gospels. So learn those chapters. It'll be helpful for you. Okay, chapter 20.
Okay, 20. Jesus questioned about authority, taxes, and resurrection.
Yeah, and remember, this is where Jesus answered all his questions so well they refused to ask him any more questions.
Right.
Yep. Okay, 21.
Okay, 21 is signs of the end.
Yeah, this is very much like the Olivet Discourse is the dominant theme here, about what Jerusalem is going to be like when it's all surrounded, and how you need to flee Jerusalem when the Son of Man comes. Just signs of the end will be good. Okay, chapter 22.
Okay, we've got Last Supper, arrested, mocked, beaten, and tried.
And by the way, the last three chapters of all the Gospels, here, 22, 23, 24, are like all the same. So they just start with the Last Supper and the betrayal of Judas, and he's arrested and mocked and tried. And then to the last three chapters, and then in the second to last, which is 23 in this case, Jesus is...
Okay, I have Jesus before Pilate and Herod, crucified and buried.
Yep, so he always dies, not in the penultimate, in not the last chapter, but the second last chapter. So this is 22, 23, 24.
And Luke is unique in including that he went on trial before Herod.
Yep.
Not just Pilate.
Yep, and then as always, all the Gospels end with the resurrection story, but here it's...
empty tomb and road to Emmaus.
Yep, which we read this morning. It's one of my favorite stories in all the Bible. Oh, are you foolish not to believe in all that the prophets have written? So there's the book of Luke. Again, summary, he comes onto the scene in Nazareth, tempted in the wilderness, and then he is ministering in Galilee until
That's 5 through 9.
Yep, until chapter 9, verse 51, he's got his face set towards Jerusalem, and then he's going towards Jerusalem in 10 through 18, and then 19 through 24, he's in Jerusalem, and we've just tried to pull out the unique stories of the Gospel of Luke. So much of this is the same as Mark has and as Matthew has. Which, by the way, is because Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called synoptic Gospels. Syn means with, soon, and optics means to see. They see kind of with the same lens. That's why they have so many stories that are the same. John is a little bit different, but there's the Gospel of Luke for you. Recap edition. Tomorrow morning we will see you in Joshua. Okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye.